Hello and welcome to my video. This is actually done live, but I'm doing the voiceover after the video. So I hope that you're able to understand everything. And I know it doesn't look as you see me here. What I'm showing you is I make cards. I make watercolor cards and I love to paint live flowers. So I had the present right in front of me. I'm actually painting natural flowers, as you can see on the corner, and we're going to repeat the same thing that I did on the other paper. I'm using hand and heel, I think it is, watercolor paper to do this project. The watercolor that you see on the screen is actually koi watercolor, and my dear husband gifted me a beautiful flower arrangement, and from that flower arrangement I took some of the smaller flowers out and I decided to paint them. So I'm basically just showing you the watercolor and how I actually do all of this. So I have basically very simple materials. I have already a pre-cut watercolor, I'm sorry, it's not a watercolor card, it's actually a paper card that I actually did, and I'm using it because it actually got damaged, so I'm using that to use it as a stencil to basically cut the watercolor cards out of the sheet of watercolor. So what you see me doing here is using that piece of paper basically as a guide, so I can do the watercolor cards to be 2.5 by 3.5. What I'm saying here, if I'm correct, is that I'm not going to fill out the entire sheet of paper. I'm going to concentrate on doing a couple of them and just enjoying the process. I don't know if you noticed, but I haven't painted in a while, and I thought that I had, an opportunity now to show you guys what I'm working on, even if it's not the greatest quality video or the greatest demo out there, but at least something that you guys can see, that I'm still working on and I'm still doing my art. Doing these cards, it's such a pleasure for me because I love to do a lot of miniature work, and for me flowers basically come naturally. So I'm showing you guys how to make these, and also to sprout your own imagination. You can do these on your own. I mean, you can gift them, you can print them, you can enlarge them, you can do all kinds of stuff with these cards. So I feel like the size actually, don't underestimate the size. You can always do and use them for your own creativity. So recording live is not as simple or as easy as it is doing them with a pre-made video, because you want to basically give so much information out, and if you're curious as to where you can get the full demo, I actually pre-record this in Periscope. Periscope is an app that you can use with Twitter, which I'm also have my account connected to, and you can basically share it on Twitter. So I've been using Periscope for a while, and I think it's a great app, and like that I don't have to do much when it comes to videos. I just do the videos from Periscope, and then I transfer them to my Twitter account to my Instagram, and from my Instagram I do it from YouTube. I do these mostly just to keep myself busy and also stress-free, because with everything that is going on around us, but I feel like having something to do artistically is always a good idea. Just so you know, these videos are actually lengthy. These are live videos and how to create these cards. So if you like, you can step a little further and you can see the process of the video. I like to explain everything as if I was almost like in a classroom full of people, explain how I do my things, how I do different themes. And I feel like flowers come very easy to me, so it's a pleasure to share it. I was actually also talking about, I started thinking that painting very small wasn't a good idea, and for some reason I felt like I wasn't giving myself my whole to my art, and I stopped painting for a couple months. And I actually was feeling bad because, I thought, well, if I give 10 minutes to art, it's just not enough. So I stopped painting, and I'm basically back doing it. So for me, it is very important to keep ourselves busy, especially around these times, because it just makes you less stressful. I also have my phone on. I know. I put music in there, and it just relaxes me. So if you have music, relaxing music, you can use your phone or you can use your radio or whatever, and just start painting. I think it's very important for us to keep ourselves busy, and we're going to possibly go and do the the demo now. So I'm trying to zoom in with the camera, which actually Periscope allows you. And I do these videos from my phone, from my S10, my Android. And so sometimes it's difficult, and so, but it's not impossible. So we're going to start doing the first artwork. And this is from the flowers that you saw on the corner. And what I do is that I basically just stencil them out, because after that we're going to cut it away from the paper and we're going to do the cards just like that one. What I'm showing here is that I actually stencil out a card, and then from there I actually copy it and transfer it to the paper. And I did a couple of them the same way, the same flower with different colors. So from just one flower you can do many cards like the ones that you see. And I actually added the blue flower, and that was my last piece. And this one is a little bit more of a loose style. I'm also showing color contrast and what shadow and light can do to the watercolor paper, and that's what you see on the exercises that I did before. And so I actually liked a lot loose style, and so the next process is going to be more loosely than actually with a pencil. So I hope that you guys enjoy, and I'm going to try my best to explain to y'all how I'm doing these cards and how I'm actually painting them. So right now I'm actually showing you guys that I'm using also a scrap paper, things that you can do on the watercolor, how you can do the little spits and drips on the watercolor, how the watercolor is actually will behave, because I have a piece of watercolor onto outside from the watercolor paper that I'm going to be working on. And I also I didn't have a napkin, I didn't have a piece of tissue, so I was actually also explaining how if you don't have a tissue paper by hand, you can actually do this with another piece and you can actually squeeze the water out, which is also very loosely and very stress relieving, I feel. So I'm actually explaining that on this process right here. So for this watercolor, I actually started with a little bit of a dry brush, and you can see that I'm not actually doing much of water. Like it's not wet into wet, it's dry onto wet. And I started doing my flower immediately. And I'm basically just copying what I see. And so you always have to be and understand that the watercolor actually dries up lighter. So you can add bold colors and you can wait for it to dry and then you can add a little bit more. You really won't stop working. So that's a good thing, and you keep yourself busy painting. What you see me here is actually using granulated. I never can pronounce it right, but I'm actually lifting up part of that paint to create some sort of texture, and at the same time I'm creating petals that obviously, that will make it a little bit lighter, and I'm also dragging with brush away from what I actually add first. So that's what you see me doing here. Then I will continue to do the stamen of the flower with a very bright yellow. The watercolors that I'm using are called koi watercolors, so they're pretty strong when they're added to the watercolor paper, and that's what I love about these watercolors. They're actually very strong. They have a very good strength, and this is how I'm completing the first flower. I think that it's very important how to know the difference between wetting to dry or drying to wet. And what I'm actually showing you guys is how color behave on paper. And so I took my scrap of watercolor and I'm going to show you how colors kind of just melt into each other while you're painting. So I'm actually wetting my paper and I'm actually showing you guys how to do wetting to wet and the difference between them two and how colors kind of just um, I guess help each other when you're layering. And so I'm going to start layering my colors, and the first color here is the actual pink, which I actually love. It's very strong pink. It's pink opera. Most of the brands carry that pink with them. And I'm also actually showing you guys how it actually expands when the watercolor paper is actually wet. To the same color, I'm actually adding that blue color. As you can see, everything kind of just expands and you see how the watercolor behaves on the paper when it's actually wet. At the same time, I'm actually controlling where the watercolor or where I want the watercolor to go. And you can do this with larger pieces as well. If you like to work with a lot of color and you like to work with watercolors, this is the best way to do a loose watercolor that has very potent colors together and how they actually behave on paper. I'm also explaining the amount of water that the brushes actually can hold. If you have a Kolinsky or you have a ACEO or you have a brush that is not actually any natural brush, you can also try this exercise by squeezing the brush. You kind of sort of know the amount of water that the brush can hold, and that also will help you to develop your paintings. So always practice basically how you want to do your watercolors and get to know your papers as well as your tools, which is your brushes. On this next exercise, I'm actually explaining how if you add less water, how the watercolor behaves. You can do petals, you can do different things, and how the watercolor looks. I actually like the first one. I think it looks actually very best for me. I like all that grainy feeling and all that watery feeling that watercolor gives. So I'm actually explaining how you can use the brushes and how you can use the amount of water, how can you control the amount of water that you put into your paper. And like that, this exercise is actually good for anybody that wants to learn in watercolors. You have to, unfortunately, sad to say, but the truth, you have to ruin a couple of papers before you start to getting the hang of watercolors. In this next exercise, we're doing the same with a lot of water, and I'm actually showing you a little bit more of a tight way of doing it. And then right next to it, I believe that I'm actually doing it a more watery and controlling where the watercolor is gonna go and how you can manage to do all this stuff. So you have to learn to basically play with your paper, play with the water, and play with your painting as to what you want to accomplish on your artwork. Once that's done, I'm doing a wet into wet, and it has a little bit of tint, which I actually explained in one of my videos. Sometimes tints tend to help you because either you have a very cool tone painting or you have a warm tone painting. Obviously, when it has a little bit of that pinkish color, you already know that that watercolor is going to be more onto the cool side than the actual warm side. So we're going to start painting hopefully soon. And so for this, I actually explain on my piece of paper how we're doing this and how we're actually controlling, how you can lift as well. And then the good thing is that we're going to have both examples side to side so you can compare and you can see me how I'm doing it, so like that you can do it on your own. And I also like that is about basically the same thing. One is dry into wet, the other one is wet into wet. And you have a choice to make, you know, when you're dealing with your paper. In the beginning, when I first started, I thought that it was always wet into wet. And then I learned, no, you can do actually these things on dry paper as well. The next example is actually again dry into wet, and I'm doing the petals, and right now I'm actually using that really strong pink that we used before, and the flower is actually on my frontal side, basically just right straight looking at the viewer. So I'm going to basically cover the entire card as we go along on the painting. Notice that as I'm actually waiting for the other one to dry, I'm actually adding the same thing that I did for the first one. I'm actually adding the stamen, and I'm doing the same thing, but because the paper is actually wet, looks a little bit more runny and a little bit more sparse. So we're gonna have to add a second layer possibly. My last example is actually not my last example, but the other flower. Again, I'm using wet into wet, and I'm doing the same thing that I did with the first flower, but I'm actually incorporating wet into wet. So you have also an idea on how to manage with this technique as well. So it's basically the same thing, but now we're doing it wet into wet. I'm showing you guys the plants, or basically the flowers, that I'm actually taking the idea from, and I have them right there. And what I do is I pick up from the whole bunch. I pick up one that I feel like I'm interested in, and I start painting it from life. But you can definitely do this with a photograph as well. For this last example, as you can see, I'm actually doing it dry into wet again, and you can really see here that I'm actually giving bold color. I'm actually adding color. I'm not skipping color. Sometimes we tend to do very light washes because we feel that it's going to be either too much on the paper, and then we won't be able to lift after that, or we won't be able to correct. And when you're painting loosely, is a good idea that you just put paint on your brush and act upon it, because otherwise you will feel as if you don't want to touch the paper. So the whole idea here is to actually do. And now for the second layer, I'm adding the same color, but I'm adding the shadow towards the flower. And whatever I feel that the shadow is, and by locating the shadow, you can actually help your painting a whole lot. So what we're doing here is that we're adding shadow onto the paper, and it's the same color, the brush loaded with color. The paper is a little bit more dry, and I really like to do this because it gives it a nice contrast, and you be able to see the shadow better, and you also be able to see the light. And if you like to know how you can do this, you can also squint your eyes, look at the subject, step back, and you get to see the shadows and the lights better. Layering is actually a very good exercise in watercolors. I actually feel that is easier to paint in layers than just straight from the tube or bold color, even though both techniques are actually really good. But I like to paint this way because it allows me to lift. I also do a lot of lifting when I'm painting, and that helps with contrast as well. What I'm saying here is that when you do that, you can actually see the layers of paint, and you can also see you basically creating petals as well. Basically doing the same thing for the stem. I'm adding the shadow of the flower, and you can see that on the stem and the flower as well. And I'm adding the same color around to create that shadow color. What I show you guys here is how by creating color and color contrast, you can see what type of colors you can add onto your paintings, what colors look good. I also explain how knowing your tertiary colors, your secondary colors, your primary colors actually help with developing a painting. Even if it's a small one, you can actually gather your colors for backgrounds with your knowing your colors and what they look good with, or what color actually matches with. Though we're creating something with a natural flower, we can also create a background for it because we know what color will look good on a background with our secondary and tertiary colors. To the next flower, I'm actually adding the other way around. I'm actually adding that pink color on top of that purple. And since I'm actually working wood into wet, you can see the layering in the work. To this painting or to this flower, I'm actually adding a little bit more straight from the palette color, and I'm doing the veins of the flower with that pink color. And you can see that I'm very bold when I'm creating, and I'm doing the shadow as well. For the middle of the flower, I'm adding that purple blue color that I added for the first two, and I'm doing the center of the flower, and you can see how it looks on the white paper and how actually the light bounces back and forth. For our fourth flower, we're doing the same thing. We're adding the same colors, but we're doing it wet into wet. So looks a little bit more grainy. You have the ability to lift up more. But we're going to do basically the same thing, just that we're doing it with the canvas or the paper being a little bit more wetter. I do apologize. I actually had a phone call, so I had to manage to get up and do what I have to do. But since you see in these 1, 2, 3, 4 examples how the paper behaves and also the watercolor behaves on paper, and I also love to work both ways, because maybe wetting to wet will not work for a painting, or maybe drying to wet will work for another work. So it's good that you do actually both exercises on your papers. Working small also allows you to create. Also, you can do this and you create your own small pieces, and you can create bigger pieces with this. Right now we're going to add the same color that we added to the third flower on the corner, well, my corner right over there. It was my corner left, but from the screen you can see on the side. So side to side flowers, one dry into wet and the other one wet into wet. This flower, I added both. I added that bold pink color, and I'm also adding the purple that we were working with. So you have all these exercises to see how the color behaves and how color looks on the paper as well. I'm doing the veins with the same color. I actually use a little bit of blue if I'm not mistaken. And I'm also dragging with me so the lines doesn't look too thick or too much, like you don't see the lines too much on the paper. Same thing goes to this flower center. It's very dark. It actually almost like if you were working with a negative, if with a picture, with a photo negative. I'm adding again my third layer to my first flower, and I'm adding more shadowing to it. Possibly this color is a green, if I'm not mistaken, a very dark green, to add very rich dark shadows on this watercolor. As you notice here, this watercolor is almost basically done, and you have your shadows, your light, and you have your layered colors in there. we're gonna do the same thing, sorry. We're gonna do the same thing for the second flower on the side. We're gonna add our basically our dark green, and we're going to basically just draw our stem. Now working on the center of the flower, I decided to use that green color because the actual natural flower has it. And that's what you see me doing in this exercise. I do the same thing with the next flower. I decided that I wanted to do this one more bold, and so I decided to wet the paper and add that purple color, that blue color. And so I kind of just spread it all over and decided to paint. Sometimes when you're painting, I don't know, things don't look okay in the beginning, and then you add more color and you feel, okay, this is better. This is life. This is not like, a preconceived idea. This is actually just creating loosely and creating from memory or whatever it is that you want to do. Just enjoying what you're doing, basically. Again, to the corner flower that you see me working in, I'm adding more shadow, and I'm adding also my green. I like a lot of shadows, as you can see, and I also add, because it's the same flower, it's just in a different color, I added that purple flower, purple color on top and layer it on top of that pink. Remember also that underneath there is that layer of pink, so you'll be able to see through all of those layers as you lay down your colors. At this point, I'm creating the layers and I'm also reinforcing the stem. So for the flower on the corner, you saw that part of that grain kind of just went through, and for someone that is starting off, maybe this is something that makes you nervous. But as you can see here, I was okay, you know, I didn't freak out or anything. And so what I do now is that I continue layering my color, and I actually use that grain to help me out with shadow. The same thing with the flower next to it, and I added that really dark purple color onto the flower. And you can tell that I'm actually very excited with this one. Adding a lot of purple. You can see a color contrast in there, and I'm actually basically doing a very bold watercolor. Again, I'm actually using my brush, and this one is a little more tinier. For the purpose is to create lines and to create detail. So I'm actually changing from that big brush to a small brush just to create a little bit of detail in there. And I'm actually creating a little bit of line, creating a little bit of detail. And I believe that I use Payne's Gray for this one. Doing the same thing with all of them, just creating and adding dark color with the small brush. Again, I'm completing the center of the flower by adding that green, and I'm also completing part of the vein, and I'm also adding, I'm lining or creating a little bit of corner there, a little bit of shadow with it. So my last flower, I'm also adding that really rich pink ochre or dark green that you see me, and I'm also adding that really dark green right in the middle of the flower. So when you're creating art, and this is what I'm trying to say, is that you will repeat what you do on your previous exercises, which I think is actually a great idea. So these were my first exercises with a pencil, and what I created first, and then what I created second, and always practice, practice, practice makes it better. And the original idea, it's that little piece of paper to create all of these artworks. I actually posted this on Twitter, and you can see it on my Instagram. Here are the flowers that I'm actually taking the idea from, the natural flowers that I'm actually painting, so you can see.